Hi, my name is Marianne Krasny, and I'm a professor in the Department of Natural Resources, and I'm also director of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University. And today I'm going to be talking to you about environmental governance and why environmental governance is important to urban environmental education. So I think the answer to this question about why is environmental governance important to urban environmental education is actually quite simple. Environmental governance is important because no single government agency, community or nonprofit organization, or even private industry can solve environmental problems alone. So it's well documented in several US cities and in cities in Europe and perhaps elsewhere that really the way we govern our environmental resources in cities is through a network of government agencies, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, and to a lesser extent, private industry. So just take for an example, think of an urban forestry governance system. And you'll probably have a city that's setting some kind of policy for how many trees, what's their targeted number of trees that they want to have in the city. You'll have community groups, like say a neighborhood association, that are involved in planting trees, as well as city organizations like the Parks Department. And then you'll have the private sector. For example, they might sponsor volunteer service days where their employees come out and volunteer to plant trees, or they might contribute some of the actual material resources like the trees themselves or the soil, the special soils that trees need to thrive in harsh urban environments. Social scientist, environmental sociologist Erica Svensson, who works at the U.S. Forest Service Urban Field Station in New York City, she and her colleagues have made these really interesting network maps of environmental stewardship governance systems in New York and other cities. So you've seen those social network analysis maps where they have the nodes, the little circles, and then lines between the circles and between the squares. And the circles or the squares represent different types of organizations, and then the connections represent the resources, the information, the communication amongst these different organizations. And another thing that Erica and other people who have looked at these governance networks and the organizations that comprise them in cities is that usually well over half of these organizations are involved in environmental education. So why is this important? In particular, why is this important to urban environmental education? Well, I think it's important for young people and adult participants of environmental education programs to understand that their organization is part of a larger governance system, and each organization and agency and private industry has a unique role. And so, for example, their organization might be involved in monitoring survival of oysters, or from sort of a citizen science point of view, or they might be involved in stewardship, and naturally they're involved in education as part of this. But other organizations also have an important role to play in sort of forming policies and carrying out these policies for our urban environmental resources. And so how might you incorporate this into an urban environmental education program? Well, for one thing, I think it's really important to invite other organizations to come in and talk to your youth and adult participants, and to make sure that the youth and adult participants understand the role that these other organizations are playing as well as their own organization. And they can even, your program participants, they can actually draw social network maps of the organizations with whom they are communicating, exchanging resources, collaborating, and then how all these organizations are connected to themselves and maybe to each other if they know a little bit more about the organizations. So there's a number of activities you can do to help kids and adult participants in your program understand governance systems. So I think this is just as important to incorporate into urban environmental education as some of the other ideas and knowledge that we incorporated. For example, biology of pigeons or biology of oysters or facts about climate change. And the reason is because I think to be effective citizens, that young people and other participants in environmental education programs, they need to understand the role of their organization, of other organizations, and then they can help to perhaps get a better feeling for the role that they would play. What kind of organization do they want to work with in the future, or would they like to volunteer? And also how all these organizations in an environmental stewardship governance system can work together towards common goals. So thank you.